Josh Cutler, a learning and development training strategy consultant. Josh is someone who really comes from a place in which he knows what he's talking about. As you all know, and as I've been saying more publicly lately, I love learning about the educational system, the model, education at large, because we're guaranteed a couple things in this life, and one of them is education. And to have the educational system be the way it is nowadays, there's many changes that can be made to make it better. And Josh is someone who comes from a place of blunt honesty and knowing. He has high level awareness because he's helped many organizations with their training, with their development on a corporate level, but also was a teacher for many years in New York and knows that side of things. The story he has and what he's learned really is from both ends of the spectrum. He's lived with individuals and taught them who've been like off the boat immigrants in New York City, like really young kids. And then has also been on the corporate side teaching high level organizations like the History Channel and helping them with their training and development with certain things. So there's a lot here. So enjoy. This one's really deep. And I hope you learned something new today, as I did many times over in this episode myself.
I have a dream.
It's one small step for man.
I am the greatest.
You want something, go get it. Period.
Nonetheless, we'll keep it rolling. But Josh, I do appreciate you being here, and I'm excited to, as always, dive deep.
Thanks, Tony. It's great. It's great to be with you. I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Yeah. So, as I was mentioning, and a while ago when we were talking too, being in the HR realm, education realm, you have to have a big heart and you have to really be about the people. So I was always curious with you, like what your parents did and like what their story is. If you got some lessons from them that implemented, your career path into education, or just something that they did influence you. But nonetheless, without even getting into the ladder of that, I would love to know like what your parents did when growing up and like what their focus was early on in life and with their individual paths.
So my parents are actually both still working. They claim that they're planning to retire at some point in the near future. I don't really see either of them actually following through on that anytime soon. So my dad's a lawyer. He's been practicing law for over 50 years. Um, he does trust in estates, like he helps people write wills and that kind of stuff. Um, my mom's a professor. She's been a professor of theater at Hunter College, which is part of the New York City Public University system. She's been there for over 40 years, and she's during that time she's written 5 or 6 books that have been published. So yeah,
Wow.
that's those are my parents in a nutshell. Honestly, they didn't do anything to influence any of my career decisions. To be perfectly honest with you, I mean, it would be nice if I had some beautiful tale to weave about how I always dreamed of becoming a teacher, but that's actually not true. Honestly, it wasn't even my idea. When I finished college, I didn't really, like a lot of people, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So, um, one of my mom's friends said, "Oh, well, he's good at languages. He could become an ESL teacher." I was like, okay, that sounds good enough to me. At least it gives me some idea to what to do. So. Uh, that's what I did for
Yeah.
14 years.
Yeah. I love that. It's amazing too that your mom worked to such an extent within education, but it just so happened to be that like you entered the field. And I love how like humbling it is. It's just like you did it because someone mentioned it and you just rolled into it. And I think it's nice to know that like you're figuring it out as you go, just like everyone else is. Even the best in the world are like as great as they may seem. It's just like, we're figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think for most people in life, no, I think very few people have a clear understanding of exactly what they want to do at each stage of their life because there's so many different things that can happen. You can't really predict. That's why if an interviewer asks me, where do you want to be 5 years from now? I mean, well, you can't plan your life in 5-year increments because it's just not how it works. Because who knows what could happen between now and then that could change your thought process. There's really no way to really predict that.
Exactly. It's so funny you bring that up. I was just talking to someone for a podcast episode, and she was like, she used to plan out 3 to 5 years in advance, but she actually, especially with business, stopped doing that because she just wants to live in the present. And it's not that she's not ambitious anymore. She's just as ambitious, but like she just lives in the moment and like adjusts to what comes because things are changing so rapidly always, especially nowadays.
That's a very Eastern type of philosophy. I remember,
Mm.
studying religions in college. I remember one of the core principles of Buddhism was to focus only on the present and not worry about the past or the future. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense because the past is over, so there's no point dwelling on that. In the future, you don't know what it's going to be, so so all you can really do is try your best to prepare for a better future. But there are, throughout the course of your life, so many different things will happen to you, but unforeseen things, both good and bad, that there's really no way to know uh, what what life holds for you.
Exactly. And there's one story, I guess not story, but like experience you had within the education realm within New York City
Mhm.
that I would say from afar probably shaped you a lot. But when you worked with younger individuals and
Mhm.
like the fact that you kind of had to be not just a teacher, but you're like a parent in
Yeah.
certain ways. So I'd really love for you to explain that experience of your life and then get into like the kids exactly and like how you really had to help them more than any teacher has to
Yeah.
with their job.
Right. So I actually have quite a bit of experience teaching both kids and adults. Let me give you a bit
Mhm.
of background on where I was teaching. So I taught in Queens, which is the most ethnically diverse place in the entire world. So our
Really?
school, yeah.
Wow.
So with I mean, at least according to the most recent census, over 200 languages are spoken just in Queens alone, aside from the other boroughs of the city. It's basically like the first landing spot for brand new immigrants when they come to New York most of the
Mm.
time. So that's a lot of the population that I was teaching. And in fact, virtually none of the students at the school where I taught were native English speakers. And it wasn't a specialized school in any way. It was just the local neighborhood public school, and that was the population that we served. So over the years, I taught both kids and adults from over at least 50 or 60 foreign countries speaking dozens of different languages at one time. And I was responsible
Wow.
for delivering the same results with them as any teacher would be. And it was really quite an extraordinary type of experience, not only because of those particular challenges, but because of the ancillary challenges that would present. Because when it's hard enough, teaching at all, but when you're dealing with young people who are suddenly in a new country, in a new culture, who some of them were born there, some had been there for several years, some were brand new. I mean, there were even times when I would get a call from the office and they say, "You're getting a new student," and that student would walk into my classroom, literally still pulling their suitcase with their plane ticket in their hand, like they literally just arrived in the country 5 minutes ago.
Wow.
And I'm not exaggerating. And so that actually happened in quite a number of occasions. But to deal with all the psychological issues, I mean, imagine you're 8 years old, suddenly you're in your parents pack you up and take you to some foreign place. You have no idea where you are or what's going on or how you're supposed to behave, and the range of reactions that I saw was really quite extraordinary. Some kids were angry, some kids were sad, some kids were confused, uh, some kids acted out just because they were so perplexed by the whole situation that they just didn't know what to do. I mean, and of course there were other kids who were perfectly fine and like they were ready to go, like nothing happened. So it really was the whole
Mhm.
range of reactions. And what was interesting, though, at least from a cultural perspective, that was actually easier dealing with kids because kids only see each other as kids. They don't really think in terms of cultural differences the way adults do. I mean, of course, I had to, dealing with
Yeah.
people from so many different backgrounds. I can tell you, for example, in our Western culture, you're taught to look somebody in the eye when they're speaking to you as a sign of respect. I remember one time I had a student from Pakistan, and he always immediately looked down whenever I was speaking to him. And I said, why don't you look me in the eye? And he explained to me that in his culture, a teacher is considered such a high position that to actually look somebody of that stature in the eye would be considered a sign of disrespect. So,
Wow.
unfortunately, it's not that way in the United States. But just learning things like that really set the framework for how I was able to see things going forward.
Yeah, that's incredible because you have to balance the workload, the education
Right.
materials, but then you have to also like influence their psyche, but also get to know them. I'm sure it was like just as informative and valuable for them as it was for you in learning about different cultures.
Of course, I mean they taught me probably more than I taught them. Bear in mind, I had two jobs. I had what was called a self-contained class. In a smaller setting, when there were fewer ESL students, there would be what's known as push in or pull out, where a teacher would pull out the small number or come in to serve that small group for a period or two a day. But our school had so many students with those needs that they actually had to have their own separate classes. And so basically, I had two jobs. I had to teach the students, firstly, all the things that they would learn in school anyway, and additionally, I had to frame it in terms of improving their English language ability too, which of course made things a million times harder because every lesson had to be geared toward both uh, skill sets. It wasn't simply teaching the students to read or do math. It was doing that within the context of people who were also learning a new language at the same time. So you can imagine that would make things many times harder.
Yeah, exactly. And I would love to know what is something that you learned a lot with those kids about not just teaching, but like parenting and kind of nurturing a younger individual. Because I mean, you kind of had a harder or like a controlled practice with doing that well. And I think it's whatever you say can be very helpful for those within the category of teaching, mentorship, parenting, because of, like I just said, that experience. So what would you say?
I think the most important thing I learned was not to take any of your own experiences for granted. I mean, because these students and these families, uh, they didn't have the the skills or the resources to provide their kids with what they needed to uh, to really become successful. But I was basically their only lifeline. I mean, not only
Mm-hmm.
was I dealing with uh, families who were struggling to make it in a new country, as our ancestors did as well. But in many cases, um, the family members had very limited formal education themselves. And in fact, I had several students whose parents never went to school at all. And so there was really no support network at home. That was they were basically once they went home, unless you had an older brother or sister to help you out, you're on your own. There's nobody there who can help you. And of course, the parents being brand new to the country, as things go when you're a brand new immigrant, you get stuck with the shit jobs. So the parents would have to be working 18 hours a day in a factory just to put food on the table, and the
Yeah.
kids hardly saw their parents a lot of the time. And of course, dealing with that, really, it was a very raw experience because when you're teaching in an inner city school, you're dealing with the people who are really struggling more than anybody else in society. So, I mean, I had ran the full gamut of all of society's most raw and basic problems. I had students who had been physically and sexually abused. I had students who were homeless. I had students who had family members in prison. You name it, I had it. So I had to deal with all of those issues on top of the learning and language issues that they were already facing. And I can tell you, my second year teaching, there was actually one student. I remember him, a Mexican boy named Fernando, and I during that year, I mean, amazingly enough, he came from some rural place in the middle of nowhere in Mexico, and his parents were only 13 when he was conceived, and so obviously they weren't equipped to do anything
Wow.
for him. Yeah. So basically, during the year he was in my class, I literally raised him like he was my own son, and
Mm,
so it wasn't
incredible.
acting necessarily as a pseudo parent, but acting as a literal parent. And in fact, his parents were physically abusing him, and I was the one, since teachers are trained to notice those signs, I was the one who called it in and put a stop to it. And of course, they tried to give me the runaround and all the bullshit excuses about why what he was telling me wasn't true. Of course, you know, all teachers are trained to spot to spot those signs. So you're not gonna put one over on us. Uh, so
Yeah.
I basically saved his life, because who knows what would have happened to him. And I saw him when he was in high school years later, and he came back and thanked me for it.
That
So
wow. Yeah, that's I mean, the fact that you kept in touch with them, incredible, but like what you did
yeah,
can I mean, I'm just like beyond word and measure to my own thinking of you doing that from one individual to another. It's just like that's profound. I mean, that's really incredible.
yeah. I mean, there were a lot of cases where I basically had to step in and teach the students in my class the moral lessons that their parents were supposed to teach them, but weren't doing. Like, this is how you're
Yeah.
supposed to behave. You know, you're not supposed to hit your classmates. You're not, you know, but this was the world they were in. Nobody uh, was really doing even the most basic level of parenting with a lot of them, and so it was.
Yeah. And teachers, I mean, they don't get enough credit already. Although some teachers, they get into that position because they don't have anything else they're really into at the moment, so they kind of just like roll into that career, and they're not as good at it. But that's another case. But for those who actually love the craft and love teaching, like they don't get as much credit as they deserve because there's so much to go through. But even you, with like the added, I wouldn't call it like burden, but just like added element of having those kids from different countries, like literally plane tickets in their hand, boarding tickets in their hand, walking to class with suitcases, like having to teach them everything. It's just like that's something that will never go unnoticed. And I'm really glad you brought it up here too, because it's really important to highlight, not just for teachers in general, especially for teachers in general, but also you. Um, I remember there's one quote you said, and this can apply to actually institutions too within education. But you said most companies treat learning and development purely as business transaction rather than human
Exactly.
interaction. And I think the same applies with schools. Like instead of just give the student an assignment, or like with the business, give the business like especially if it's B2B, give them the software they need and just let them be. It's more so like, what are your actual needs? Like, how can I actually help you step by step to grow to where you need to get to, and kind of hold your hand and guide you. Um, I've noticed companies who do it great, companies who do it bad. But I think that quote you mentioned is something that was lost in the past couple of decades
Right.
with both business and education. Yeah.
Right, and to that point, learning and development is something that has really been ignored or not seen as important in a lot of companies. Um, and as we move into the next generation, if you will, um, companies are recognizing that um, opportunities to learn or lack thereof are one of the main drivers of either employee engagement or employee turnover, depending on the quality of the instruction that's available. And the difference in my perspective is that coming from a background in education, I've seen how much better things can be. Um, I mean, that's one of the hallmarks of my work, because the educational standards that teachers are held to are so much higher than anything in any company. Um, and one of the real uh, motivating factors that gets people to work with me is that they see that, and they recognize that it's important to have a sound educational strategy to link the learning need to the business outcome, which is the lack thereof is something that really hasn't been addressed. And And I think the reason for that is that in most cases, learning and development is really, in many companies, simply viewed as an outgrowth of HR rather than recognized as within its own niche as an educational function within a business. And so, really, if you really want to narrow it down to the meat and potatoes of it, you have an educational program within the business, and it's being run by people who aren't educators. That's why it's not working. You need people who know how to teach, who know how to reach people on that level, in addition to solving a business goal. And again, getting back to the point that in most companies it's just transactional. Oh, I recommended this training for this group so they could check the boxes and say that it was done, and that supposedly improved a business outcome. But it isn't working. And if you saw on my LinkedIn profile, somebody else mentioned this to me, this Harvard study that was known as the Great Training Robbery. Like 90% of corporate learning initiatives don't achieve their ROI. And really, I've pinpointed the reason why that is. Because you need to actually teach properly, not just go through the motions to say that it's been done, but you need to actually meet people on their level to not only meet the needs of what the company needs to move forward, but also to meet the individual learning needs of what the individual people, because a company is only as good as its people. So, so really, you have to meet them on their individual levels as well.
Exactly. Especially if you're going to scale things out. When you're scaling just a business or just like any community organization, you're scaling people at the end of the day, because those people are the things that make the tools, the products, the services. So to your point, it's like you have to water your garden. You can't just let it go lay flat and not produce anything for it to actually flourish and then produce more. So I completely agree, and I see where you're coming from, and that's why I wanted to have you give the example of working with, and I have it here, the A&E networks with the History Channel, when you went in and implemented your educational program or revamping of it, because I think it's best, instead of like talking through it, giving either past examples or like real-time scenarios. So I would on the point of like, all right, you brought up you need to revamp the strategy in which the way people learn, because it's good that they're learning, but the way in which they're doing it is not effective. So for you actually did that. I'd love for you to highlight that.
Sure. So A&E was my first consulting project outside the New York City school system. That was a bit different than what I've been doing more recently, because it what didn't involve necessarily creating a learning and development program for employees, but that was where the senior leadership of the company approached me, and they said, we have a series of educational videos on a variety of different topics, throughout history, but unfortunately they haven't been selling. And so the first thing I asked them was, well, what supplementary materials do you have to provide to teachers so that they'll be able to sell? And they said, well, we don't have anything. And they said, well, that's why it's not selling, because what I explained to them was that teachers have such an enormous workload as it is, that there's so little time to include anything that's not part of the immediate curriculum of lessons that they have to get through anyway, that if you want to even have a chance of being able to do this, you have to have a series of ready-made lessons for them, because if you ask them to take hours out of their schedule to create new lessons to go with the programs that you've created, there's no way that's ever going to happen, because there just aren't enough hours in the day for them to be able to do that. And so what I did was I created a series of lessons to go with their educational videos, and once they did, they immediately were able to package it and recommend it to teachers as a unit of study with its own lessons. And then, of course, the sales of those products immediately went through the roof, because the teachers had the resources they needed to actually make it work, instead of having to produce it on their own.
Exactly. If you're to look at it from like History Channel business standpoint, it's like you want to make it as efficient and time saving as possible for the person who has it. But then if you're just looking at it from a teacher standpoint, like I just literally need help because I don't have enough time in the day to juggle everything.
Exactly. So basically, so from a teacher's perspective, the thought process is, unless you give me all the tools that I need to make this in advance to make this happen, there's just no way there'd be enough time to actually do it.
Yeah, exactly. And there was another quote I had here that involves something of that. It said, the solution to developing an effective learning program is to develop a sound educational strategy.
Exactly.
So the strategy, I mean, it's funny too, because when you think of some things like I do on the agency side of like even our business with Dream Big and Co., although we're a media company and that's a bigger vision, like with the agency stuff, it all comes down to what's the direction and the strategy, because if you don't have that, you're going to be aimlessly wandering and meandering without like effectively hitting your target audience or making the right videos or that content that actually speaks to your brand voice. So the strategy is the thing that drives everything. So people like you, even Yuri, like mutual connection, like the world needs you when it comes to that stuff.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
very much.
Yuri's been instrumental in one of the things that I really struggled with most as I made my transition from education to business was explaining how to present myself in a way that resonated with business people. And Yuri was the one who taught me how to do that. And if not for him, that I don't know that it ever would have happened. But he was really instrumental in pinpointing what the way I needed to convey my message in such a way that it would be seen as valuable and relevant to what business people were doing. So I definitely credit him for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yuri Crewman, for context of anyone listening or watching, he's on episode 70, I believe, but really great mind, in a similar category, or I should say industry, as Josh, but Yuri actually recommended Josh as a connection to me, and it's been great since. But one thing I saw on Twitter the other day that just adds to your point that you just said is when it comes to like having a product or service or something you just want to explain to people, the way you communicate it is just as important as the thing itself.
Right. And to that point, one of the main challenges that I have, because I'm at this point, I'm ready to transition out of my consulting practice and into a full-time role as a director or VP of L&D. And one of the main challenges that I'm dealing with is that a lot of companies have never considered anything like this before, even though that they recognize that it's a lot better than what they're doing now. Change is hard for most people to wrap their heads around. And of course, I've even had people, senior L&D people at companies say, I'm not going to give you an interview because since you know so much more about this stuff than the people we have, we'd all be in fear for our jobs. So
really, wow.
Yeah, they've actually come out and said that to me. And, but the difference is that having been an educator and having been held to a standard that's so much higher and seeing what's possible as opposed to really what's in a more transactional business L&D focus, seeing the levels of possibility and what can really be accomplished when you actually focus on developing people based on creating a synergy between the company's needs and their individual learning needs and gearing the instruction toward their individual levels within each topic. I mean, the things that there's so much that isn't being done and then that should be done. And it's time to really step up and say, this is what we need to do to move it forward. It's not, to me, and a large part of what I have of the challenge that I face is that I have to make my perspective appear more normal, even though my approach and methodology clearly are far outside the mainstream, even though they shouldn't be. But some people don't necessarily know what to make of that. And I mean, and of course, Yuri is helping me focus on finding the people who will be more receptive to that. In fact, I just went through a hiring process for a senior L&D role at Facebook, and I made it all the way to the very end. It started with over 1,000 people, and it came down to me and just one other person, and I had a lot of people pushing for me. And at the very last minute, they picked the other person over me, and I'm like, it was devastating, of course.
Wow.
And
Yeah. Well, it shows your value.
yeah, well, of course. I mean, it says a lot to make it. I mean, how many people could make it to a final round interview at Facebook? I mean, most people would never even be considered for a first interview at Facebook for any job. So, to me, it shows that I'm really on the right track, because what my ultimate goal is to make what I do the standard and the norm rather than the exception. Because
I have to sit with that. That's good.
yeah, and because I'm not willing to tolerate less than acceptable standards in, because when I work with my corporate clients, I consider them like my students, and I won't allow, when other people say, oh, well, they have to do this be done just like this or in this time frame. A big issue that a lot of people have is that they want to see the immediate business impact, but they don't want to put in the work to actually make that happen. And so I'm like, no, we're going to follow the proper educational protocol to make sure these people get the sound learning experience based on proper educational protocol that's actually going to help them take their careers and the company to the next level. We're not going to cut any corners. I'm holding it to educational standards, which honestly, unfortunately, no business person, unless they've been a teacher themselves, has ever really experienced. And that's one of the things I've had to scale back, is that since the standards, at least the educational standards in L&D are so, in education are so much higher than what most business people are accustomed to. I've really had to bring it down a peg and really help and try to address people on their level. But
exactly,
right, that's really it. But as we go through it, as time progresses, I mean, there've been certain clients that I've actually trained the same way I would train a new teacher. It took months to go, just to get the basic level. And of course, like any real skill, it takes years to actually really get the craft down. But what I do is, it's multifaceted. It's not just designing an educational program for your employees, but for those who recognize how important it is. Once the educational program is up and running, because that's the more critical piece in terms of the time constraints, they'll hire me for an additional period of time to actually train them to deliver it properly. And I train them to truly teach, not just train or facilitate, but to really dig deeper, and, to incorporate things like differentiated instruction, meaning tailoring the content to the levels of each individual person, developing, critical thinking skills, not just having an answer that's right or wrong. It's not like saying, oh, well, what's 2 + 2? But explain to me, okay, but it's like saying, you've told me the 2 + 2 is 4. Now explain to me your thought process in terms of how you figured that out. And in fact, in education, that's actually, they've actually moved away from rote memorization and into critical thinking skills, because a lot of state education systems have recognized that in order to prepare students for the jobs of tomorrow, they're not really learning the critical thinking skills necessary. They're just going through the motions and they were just going through the motions of memorizing facts. Well, 2 + 2 is 4, but why is 2 + 2 4? What's the thought process behind it? And map it out. I mean, that's just an example, but instead of, instead of just repeating back this in your book report, this is what happened in this story. You take it to a new level and say, well, seeing things from the perspective of this person in the story, what do you think their motivation was for doing things in just a certain way? It gets deeper into that type of thing, and that's developing those higher order thinking skills. It's not just the what, but the why, and the real advancement of the thought process that enables people to learn on a deeper level. And it works for adults just as well as kids. A common misconception is that there's this tremendous difference in terms of how you would design a lesson for children as opposed to adults. But the differences really aren't as stark as you might think. Of course, kids need more guidance and more handholding, and of course, with adults, it's more self-directed. But as far as how the actual component of the lesson goes, every educator follows a basic 3-step process in every lesson. You introduce the topic, you do the activity, then you come back and review what you've learned. That's true for kids just the same as it is for adults. So, if you went to a school, every single lesson would follow exactly that same 3-step protocol. It's that way now, and it's always been that way since the dawn of education. So, really, one of the main challenges that I've had to overcome are people's misconceptions of my work, rather than because people have their perceptions of what they do relative to what other people do. And of course, once you actually talk to people in another industry, whatever it may be, like you make podcasts for a living. I'm sure I have all sorts of ideas about what that job might be like. But of course, if I were to interview you, I would learn all sorts of things that I never would have expected. So what I think we need to do, I think everybody across the board needs to actually talk more to people who do different things, because the reality of what people do in different jobs is most often very different than what you'd expect.
Exactly. That's a really good example to note it with. And I hope people can, if they're not taking notes, they better be going back and rewinding.
That's right. The teacher's going to come check.
Exactly. There's a couple of things I wanted to bring up. One, West Point, I forget who made the or system of it, but they have this thing where they, just like you said, the 3-step process, you learn, or you can consume, you educate people, and then you review. But when you review, the thing of West Point that they do is they, even after reviewing and before the next class or session, they review the notes for the upcoming lesson. So it's like another added layer to just be so engrossed in the lesson itself and learnings itself. But that's just another side note. But the other thing I was going to mention too is I've been in this huge loop of learning, and it's been shown over and over and over to me through the past 2 years of always seek understanding instead of right or wrong. And it's crazy to see in everything you just explained and what you're going through. A lot of people, they're going for right or wrong instead of seeking understanding, both on the level of corporations not wanting to change because they don't want to lose their jobs, which is insane and ludicrous, and actually is doing a huge hindrance to the growth of the younger generation and people. But then when it comes to students too, the thing that teachers have to understand when you talked about critical thinking is have people strive, or have your students strive for understanding of something instead of just giving them the lesson plans and teaching them and having regurgitated information. Because the school system, it didn't fail me as much, although in kind of ways it did when I got to college. But I know for certain many people it failed very close to me, or just acquaintances I know of. But yeah, I mean, everything you said, it's the teachers are put in a bad position because of the system that's set up. But even then, so they're accustomed to that, so they can't change much. But even then, they can do a better job of approaching it better. But like I said, it's the system they're in. But yeah, just amazing points you mentioned.
Thank you. And to that point, because of the situation they're in, education, as far as I know, is the only industry where labor gets blamed for the failures of management. Essentially.
Yeah.
So basically, most, New York City, like most large city school systems, it's a dysfunctional mess. And it's such a top-down structure. There's really not much in the way of leeway. You get some bureaucrat somewhere gives a mandate, and that has no relevance to the work you actually do with your students, and then you're somehow held responsible if it doesn't work. And basically, essentially, like a lot of government agencies, they have the privilege of complacency because it's not like, unlike a company that has to constantly generate new business. Um, since public education is a right for all kids, that means they have an endless supply of money coming in. So they don't really have any incentive to do things any differently or to actually do things efficiently or do things correctly, because since they know that they won't ever run out of money, they can
Mm.
basically just uh, give you a pile of crap, and it's just the teacher's job to turn the crap into gold and make it work. And of course, if that doesn't happen, then it's the teacher's fault for for not for not making it happen. So I mean, basically, that's the dilemma a lot that teachers have been facing for quite some time. Like, you're told this is the way you have to do it, but then if you say, but that's not right for the way my students learn, doesn't matter. This is how it has to be. Every lesson exactly like this. I'm like, well, what did I study education for? If you're gonna micromanage every aspect of what I'm doing, so basically, education is the teaching game, and it was like this long before I got into it. It's basically a cat and mouse game. Essentially, when the big shots come into your classroom to see what's going on, you follow the program and you say, "Oh yes," and then others, "Oh yes, very good, very good." And then as soon as they leave, basically, you have to sneak in real teaching according to the practices that you know are best for your students when nobody's around. And of course, when the big shots come in to see what you're up to, you have to act like you're following the program. They go through all the paperwork to make sure that it's most of it's just this mindless nonsense. I mean, I remember when they would come in and they would tell you how you have to decorate your classroom, and they spent I remember one time they spent over like an hour arguing over what color paper I should have on the bulletin board instead of the actual quality of the work that was on the bulletin board. I mean, this is the level that we're at here. Like, one person said, "Oh, I think it's red. I think it should be green. No, we should have this pattern over here." But and put basically, I mean, your job is it's all about appearances. Your job is to be an interior decorator just as much as it is to be an educator. um, and so basically what you're doing is creating a Potemkin village, in that if one of the big shots comes in to visit the school, as long as everything looks the way it's supposed to hell with what the kids are actually learning as far as they're concerned. As long as you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed according to the protocol that they're looking for, regardless of whether, I mean, let's be honest, the school system doesn't give a rat's ass about the kids or the teachers for that matter. One thing that I learned throughout all this time is that the system simply exists to sustain itself. That's really all it is. And so, I mean, and it's that realization that it's the main driver of teacher attrition, is that when the blinders come off and when the rose-colored glasses come off, and teachers realize that you care about the kids, but nobody else does, then what goal are you actually trying to accomplish? When you realize that the focal point of your work is really just to meet some meaningless bureaucratic mandate that has nothing to do with your student success, and that's what you're going to be judged on, and that's what you're going to be evaluated on. It's very disheartening, and really, unlike in a company where they actually care about employee engagement because their bottom line depends on it, they couldn't care less. In a large system, you could stay or you could go. Doesn't make the slightest difference to them at all. In fact, they would rather that you left, because what they really try to do now is they try to make the teaching environment so unpleasant that you'll leave on your own, because that way it prevents your salary from getting too high, and then they won't have to pay a pension later on. So basically, what their goal is nowadays, they don't really care about teacher quality. Sure, obviously, a teacher with 20 years of experience is going to have a great deal more knowledge over somebody who's just walking in the door for the first time. But they don't care about that. They only care about saving money. So what you see now is, somebody who's been teaching for 25 or 30 years, been only getting the most exemplary evaluations. Suddenly, they're declared incompetent. They try to push them out. But really because since an older teacher gets paid twice as much, they think only in terms of dollars and cents. I mean, if they really cared about the student's education, they wouldn't do it that way. But really, I mean, looking back, I probably should have left a bit sooner. Um, my main goal was to get past 10 years in the system, because in so doing, when I turn 55, I automatically get the retiree health benefits for the rest of my life, which are, I mean, even though city jobs in city government don't pay a lot, the benefits are phenomenal. I mean, they're way better than anything you get in a company. And so once I got that secured, I probably should have left then. I stuck it out a little longer than I should have. That was my mistake. But having that cushion, knowing that I'll no matter what happens, I'll always have that protection later in life, is really is very comforting. And but then I realized after I got that, I don't really need anything from them anymore, because it's not really a high growth kind of place. If you're, I mean, what can you really do, and how can you move yourself up? What can you really become other than a higher level bureaucrat? But you're still following this. All it means is that you get paid more to deal with even more bullshit within the same screwed up system. So really,
One sec. I was echoing there. So one thing, there's many things I want to say, but I see as though like the greatest service you can do right now is just calling out everyone on their bullshit and how everything is just not correctly done. I mean, everything you've said before, it points to how it's just two-faced in a way. A lot of the way in which you said, like, kind of bigger guys that come in or the managers of the system that makes education what it is, they're just trying to keep themselves afloat instead of actually changing the system itself to help everyone. So it seems as though, and we're witnessing it, there's going to be like a flood that happens that kind of deteriorates and destroys like the educational model as it is now. And we're seeing that with like stuff going online, stuff going digital. And it's going to happen eventually. And I feel bad for the ones that are currently in that system with teachers and educators who have to uphold and deal with that. Like you said, that they have to like, when the bigger people come in, like they have to make certain as though they're doing the program the way it should be done. And then when they leave, they teach how they want to. So it's like, it seems like it's just, if you were to look at it in the analogy of like a relationship with a man and a woman, it seems as though people are cheating on each other, but it's because like the other person is doing something incorrectly. So it's just all wrong.
I guess that's one way of looking at it.
Not right. It's not right. It's great that you have learned all this and now you can use all of those learnings to apply it better within whatever role you get. Because whatever company has you is gonna have a great person on their side from what
they sure are, and it really shouldn't be this hard. Just because really that's been my struggle, because my background is different. That somehow means that I don't meet whatever they're looking for. Well, you know what? Maybe you should be looking for what's better rather than what's the same. And to your point of calling people out on their bullshit, well, I mean, that is something that I'm known for. As you've probably gathered, my personality is very straight to the point. I don't pull any punches. Some people say it's because I grew up in New York. I also have Tourette's. I don't know how much of that actually influences my personality. It could be a lot, or perhaps not so much. Or maybe I don't know how would I be different otherwise if I didn't have it. But either way, I'm not somebody who sugarcoats things, and I prefer to deal with other people who are the same way, because I'm not, as Yuri has pointed out to me, because we've been working together for some time. He said, your personality is so transparent that you're not capable of pretending to be you're not capable of having an ulterior motive, even if you wanted to, because that would mean you'd have to disguise yourself as being something other than who you are. And that's literally, it's not in my nature to be able to do that. I mean, whenever you meet me, it's like it's like I'm holding a deck. You've dealt me my poker hand, and I'm showing you all my cards already, right from the very beginning. That's the person I am.
I love that. Yeah, that's how it should be. I mean, just transparent, straight to the point. You're helping people by being that way.
I
So it
agree.
doesn't have them lose time on whatever they want to progress with you on. I love that too. And one thing I always want to bring up is like future goals you have, but you already stated that within your like beautiful explanation of everything before or twice before. So I'm excited. I'm just excited to see what happens and like how you can implement your knowledge base into whatever you get into. The thing with Facebook, um, although many would say, "Oh, it's too bad you didn't get it," it's gonna lead to something even better because you have that mindset as though if I can get this far,
Exactly.
imagine what I can do if I'm in the right place. You know.
I mean, even though it was devastating, to work so hard to get that close. Yuri was the one who pointed that out to me. He said, Facebook is one of the most selective companies in the world, and to go from hundreds of applicants down to you and just one other person, and they told me that the other person didn't beat me by much. It was a knife's edge decision, and there were a lot of people pulling for me just the same. I have a hunch that because I have a good friend who works there too. I have a hunch I'll probably end up there sooner rather than later, and if not there, hopefully some other company that's at that level. My goal is to if I end up there, my goal is to become their first chief learning officer because they don't have one, and or if I end up somewhere else, to really create a vision of eventually as a chief learning officer to really establish a protocol for a company as according to proper educational protocol, so that everybody's individual needs are met as far as their L&D needs are concerned.
Say you're like an SLO, chief learning officer at a company, say we're per se Facebook. Like, what would you do when you got in? Would it be for internal matters and educating employees, or would it be for like products they offer for users?
I guess it would cover everything. I mean, I think. I mean, the thought that I had in mind. This is just me brainstorming. What I would want to do is, in most companies, learning and development is reactive rather than proactive. And what I mean by that is, they say, this new law was just passed. Quick, put together a training that shows we're in compliance with this new law. So they're just struggling to keep up with what's there. So what my perspective is to look at the situations that you typically face, develop a curriculum of lessons based on those topics because they'll come up again, and of course you can alter them to meet the needs of whatever particular people you have there at the time. But if you already have the procedures in place to train people on whatever situation comes up, things are going to go a lot more smoothly. It's like be like if you were in school and they came to you and said, "Oh, the kids have to learn math this week. Quick, make a bunch of lessons." Well, that's why they give you the curriculum in advance so you can plan it out. So, on the first day they hand you all the books with all the lessons that you're going to need for the whole year, so that way you know what's coming and you can plan for it. So
that makes sense. Yeah, exactly. That's a great example to use. And there's so much need, there's so much value and so much insight in what you're doing within the marketplace, even if it wasn't a marketplace, like just people right now, it's just dwindling down and deteriorating in terms of people's learning within institutional related things. But like I said, as things are going digital, you have companies like LinkedIn or Facebook or others like or YouTube even, who are going to be the ones who like help foster that. Right. So it's amazing that they have the bandwidth, resources, and position themselves to be able to hire people to the likes of yourself and others. So yeah, I love all of that. And if there's anything else you wanted to bring up, I'll give you some runway to do so. But I appreciate every drop of words you mentioned and brought up.
Thank you. I've had a great time talking to you. I love talking to people in general. But really, I guess in closing, what we really need to focus on, and this is my message to every company, it's time to take learning and development to a new level. And not just within that realm, but there's no need to be afraid of people who do things in a different way. Because to me, and I actually wrote an article about this on LinkedIn. I don't know if you had a chance to look it over. The value of hiring non-traditional candidates, because if you have a business problem and all you have are people with the same background seeing things the same way, you're not going to solve that problem. The only way to solve it is to hire somebody who has a different perspective, because they know how to get it done.
Exactly.
But it's all about checking boxes, and somehow a lot of companies have come up with this this false reality that anybody who hasn't followed an exact linear career path according to their exact standards is somehow a greater risk to the company than anybody else. But if you actually take the time to think that over, there's no actual truth to that. It's just a lie that people have created because it's more comfortable to think that way. Because when you have to actually acknowledge that somebody who hasn't done everything exactly the way you have is capable of doing your job, that makes people feel vulnerable. And so they basically created this myth of following a cookie cutter approach, or the necessity to follow a
Yeah.
cookie cutter approach, really as a matter of self-preservation. But in reality, to me, the bottom line is, if you're able to get great results, no matter what it is that you do, because results drive any business. If you're able to get great results and you've demonstrated that you can get great results, well, then who cares what your background is? That's the bottom line. It's so basically the challenge that I face is that I've been forced to try to learn how to sound more like a traditional company guy, even though, ironically enough, the reason that I've been so successful with my clients is because I'm not a traditional company guy, is because I give people ideas that they're not used to hearing. And so that's really the struggle that I face. And it shouldn't be that way, because companies are only holding themselves back.
Exactly. When I think about personal growth, a lot of the times people get in their own way. And it's no different now. If you see that at like a microscopic level of just the person, then you apply it to the macro level or a bigger level of everything you're saying with educators or educational system and just the management of these huge companies. It's the same thing. It's they're getting in their own way
that's it.
because they're trying to self-preserve. Yeah, it's like if you were to say, if like dinosaur age, they died off because of the Big Bang, whatever happened, like there's going to be a huge thing that happens that will cause them to die off just because they're trying to self-preserve and they're not adjusting to what's actually helpful and needed. And yeah, you couldn't have said it better. If I went on, I would subdue the wisdom you dropped. So I think there's great stuff in that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And then you need I agree with that too. Like I believe in the future, a lot of companies are going to have like chief editorial officers, or like just people that will be not editorial officers, but like people that'll be at a distance, but they'll be in the C-suite because they won't be involved in the day-to-day as much, or like managing, but they'll just be like your they'll kind of be like a therapist that just like looks from afar and takes notes and says like, oh, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, just because and I had this conversation with the past person I interviewed just today, and her episode will probably be a little earlier than yours, but like we talked about the importance of when starting within entrepreneurship, right? This is an example of what I was saying before with outsider perspective and what you said with having different perspective. When you start in entrepreneurship and you're a first-time founder, it's actually beneficial if you don't know certain things, because you're more inclined to take action because you won't do like risk assessment or like, will this work? Rather, you're just following your intuition.
That's what I did.
So I think that, yeah, exactly.
I mean, what was my innovation? What did I actually do? All I really did was I took the same concepts that teachers have been using for years because they know it works, and I applied it in a business context instead of a school. That's all I really did. Now, to my great astonishment, nobody's ever done that before. But, a lot of the greatest inventions were things that were so shockingly simple that amazingly nobody had ever thought of them before. Like take Earl Haas. He's the guy who invented tampons. What did he really do? All he did was attach a string to a piece of cotton, and women's lives were forever changed. But what would the world be without him? So,
Good point. Exactly. It's like what we said before. It's how you communicate it, because you're not reinventing the wheel. It's just you're framing it differently so that people can see it as, oh my gosh, this is how we should be doing it. Yeah, incredible. Yeah. I am so happy that we got to the point of being able to do this.
Oh, absolutely. It took me coming to my girlfriend's house to have the internet strong enough to actually continue all the way through.